Okay, welcome to Born to Be Wide. For those of you who haven't been here before, we're going to have a discussion with a variety of different people involved in promoting gigs. And we'll have an interval after about 3/4 of an hour, and then you can write down any questions you might have on a piece of paper, which you'll find over there with Emily, who's waving them. Wave them more, Emily. That's it. Emily's got some pens as well, and if you feel that there's something comes up that you can't wait to ask about, then just interrupt. Bruce normally does, so take your lead from him. Yeah, I guess the best thing to do now is maybe to have the various panelists introduce themselves. So, John, do you want to start? Can you multitask, switch off your iPhone?
I'll manage in a second. My name's John Stout. I'm a promoter with Regular Music. We're based in Edinburgh, been going since the 1970s. It's Regular Music, if you don't know, is an independent, so not aligned to any multinationals, and we only promote in Scotland. On top of that, I also look after the live bookings worldwide for a band called Salsa Celtica.
I'm Neil Pennycook. I play in a band called Meursault, based in Edinburgh. We've put on our own shows, sort of historically, for ourselves and friends' bands and what have you. Yeah.
I'm Grainne Braithwaite. I run Synergy Concerts. We promote concerts throughout Scotland and recently started putting on concerts in England too, in the north. We've been running for about 10 years. We also do club nights on top of concert promotion. That's it.
And are there any bands that you've promoted a lot, or any bands that you've got a particularly long relationship with? In terms of promoting, yeah, you, Grainne.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I mean, we have a really good relationship with artists like Explosions in the Sky, Shellac, Fortet, I've been working with for about 15 years. Who else? Joanna Newsom. I mean, we like to develop artists from the kind of ground up, and we're usually pretty good at hanging on to those artists for the duration of their career.
Emma.
My name's Emma Hogan. I work at ITB. It's a booking agency based in London. ITB has been around since the late 70s. I've been working there for, I think, 7 years now. Together as an agency, we represent some of the biggest and most established names in the world. None of them are mine yet, but people like Biffy Clyro, Fleetwood Mac, Bob Dylan, Neil Young. Personally, I look after Dry the River, P.S. I Love You, Jake Hart, Dancing Ears, and Ages and Ages, and a few more.
Tallah.
My name is Tallah Brash. I work here in the Electric Circus. I've been here for 2.5 years. The venue has been the Electric Circus for almost 4.5 years. It used to be an R&B nightclub before, but now we do live music, which is much preferred to me. So I'm a promoter and booker. I do design, all the kind of background stuff for the live scene, and I run some of the clubs here too.
Okay, so I think that there's various different levels of venues and types of show here, and I guess a good start would be really Tallah, if you explain to us what you do, what your job as a promoter involves.
So everything from booking brand new bands that have just gotten together as kind of local openers for bigger gigs, right up to headline bands for festivals. We put on our own festival a few months ago called Big Day In at the Electric Circus, and we had Dutch Uncles headlining it. And I look after the artists, so there's artist relations on the day when the bands arrive. I'm here doing hospitality for them, making sure that they're happy. And then
How do you do that?
How do you do that? Mostly you give them what they want, but it depends on what they have given you in the lead up. So it always depends on like how well the show has sold and what budget you've got to work with. So you kind of do your best, but that's all to do with liaising with the tour manager in the lead up to it. just saying this is our catering budget. We had the Twang playing here a couple of days ago, and they had quite an extensive catering budget, but they also had what is called a buyout. So they'll get given a set amount of money per person so that they can go and buy dinner, basically. And that totaled more than my entire catering budget. So we did a little negotiation, and they got their entire rider and no buyout. So it's just finding out what they want in advance rather than kind of waiting until the day. I also do all the design work here, so any poster that you see for Electric Circus that isn't being put on by another promoter, I've done it. The big A0s outside, adverts that you see in the Skinny, I run the website.
So what's the process then? If you hear a band, you like them, what's your next move, especially if it's a band that you've not heard of, a local band rather than something that an agent's put you on to?
Well, we try and, if there's a band that we've just heard of that are local and we really like them and we want to get them in, we'll look at what shows we've got coming up and we'll try and figure out if any of the headliners are suitable, if they would be compatible, because we like to do bills that work together, because you have to think about who's coming to the gig and they're coming to see the headline band. So you want to try and put a bill together where they're going to like kind of both bands or all three bands. So if there is then a gig coming up that we think, yes, they'd be great, we'd then approach them. So go to their social network site. Facebook is the most popular one these days. Find out a contact. It's very important for bands to have a contact on there. And then we just drop them an email and ask them if they want to come and play. It's simple.
Is there a way that you particularly like to check the music out? And do you expect there to be a SoundCloud link, or is there? Do you like video?
Either SoundCloud or Bandcamp is quite a good one as well. We're quite nosy. We like to see how active they are on their social networking site. If they've not said anything for a while, we kind of want to know why. So we'll find out if they have been playing gigs or not. We also look at how many likes they have on their pages. It's all quite important because the number of likes equates into the numbers of tickets they sell for shows. And if a local band isn't going to sell you any tickets, it's good to work with a young band and build them up, but you don't want to lose money all the time.
Do you ever book bands just because you think they're amazing, just to give them that chance?
Yes.
How often do you do that?
As often as an amazing band comes around, I guess.
Okay, that's a great answer.
I've put Meursault on before when they were down at not playing the Queen's Hall. You know, I put them on at Sneaky Pete's.
Did she make you happy, Neil?
As happy as I can be.
That's good. John, when you're promoting, what do you do? I mean, how do you select the artists that you put on? I mean, from assuming they're not acts that you've worked with before.
I think at Regular's level of promoting, it's quite a lot of the time it's similar sized venues to this, but it's also quite a lot of the time, Glasgow Royal Concert Hall or the SECC. So, there's a huge variety of scale of artists that we work with. We have normally, at the top end of those kind of capacities, have been working with that artist all the way through their career. So we may have started with them at this level, or they've broken through just at a higher level than this venue would really cope with. So we're working primarily with agents, the vast majority of whom are based in London, and someone like ITB on many of the artists. In terms of a more local sense, Scottish artists, of course, we're reasonably active and keeping abreast of what artists are out there in Scotland, and have developed over the years many artists been working. Mark Mackey, who's essentially regular music now, for instance, has been working with Shirley from Garbage since way before Garbage days, and we were doing a show last year, just last summer on Garbage's last tour. So that's a relationship that must have been, Bruce, tell me, 20 years? Easy. Goodbye, Mr. Mackenzie, beforehand, of course. In terms of bands that are just starting out, bands that really aren't at the level where they're headlining a show, even at this capacity yet, or maybe just at this level, we may get involved, or we may ask if they're interested in becoming involved with us and talking about where we would go next with them. But it could be someone who's just doing support slots at the moment. The other thing, of course, is that when the need arises, we've got to be able to source a very suitable support for a national touring artist too. So it's very important for us to know who's out there, who's high quality, who's going to add something to the show, both aesthetically and potentially also financially.
What do you look for when you're checking out these potential support acts? Do you have an afternoon where you trawl through loads of new bands that you've not heard of, or do you hang out in Bannerman's ever and check out what's going on there? What's your general approach to this, John?
It's very time dependent. So one of the scarcest resources I have is time. So it's very, very difficult to keep up 100% with every emerging band in all the cities in Scotland, because we were out doing gigs virtually every second night. So
how do people get to you?
Yeah, what I'm looking for is an ability to see and listen to the band. Very frustrating when you can't find contact details on someone's website or Facebook or whatever. It's just the most infuriating thing. So make sure you've got your contact details on there. Just an email address. That's all we need. Don't need phone numbers or anything.
Could I just add to that? Make sure you've got some music on there as well. I just went to check out a band today on their Facebook page, and they've actually just done a deal with a new label, and there was no music, but the direct Facebook always comes up first, and it's really annoying because you can't listen to the band. So if you do insist on using Facebook to promote yourselves, which I'd always advise you not to do, have a presence but have a website or a Bandcamp, then make sure at least you've got your music on there and the other sort of stuff that you would need, like a biography and contact details as well.
And don't make it so you have to like the page to hear the music.
Yeah, that's really annoying. Because then if I don't like the music, it's really hard to unlike it, and it's just annoying. What you want to do is make it as easy as possible for people to hear your music. And the reason I hate Facebook, not just because it's annoying to navigate and they keep changing stuff, but it's also the fact that people can get their Facebook hacked. The Facebook can decide you've breached their terms, and they can close your whole thing down. It happened to a band called Little Kicks from Aberdeen recently. It happened to an artist that we've been working with called Siobhan Wilson, who suddenly started getting thousands of Egyptians liking her page, but she couldn't actually get into it herself. So these things are really... be mindful of it. Facebook is good for promoting stuff, but don't rely on it 100%. Grainne, when you're, how do you check out new acts, especially Scottish ones? Do you have a favoured approach?
Well, I mean, to be honest, what I tend to do is I troll through blogs for music. And I go on Facebook a lot. And I kind of rely on people in certain scenes in Edinburgh and Glasgow to inform me of what's going on. Like Tallah and John Paul from here are really, really, really on the ball. And so if ever we have something coming up in Edinburgh and we want to know if there's something local, if we are able to add it to the bill, that they would be like the first port of call. Also, we get sent so many emails from artists with their SoundCloud links and things like that. We listen to every single thing that we get given, even if we can't always respond. Sometimes we're listening to it at 3 a.m. It just depends when we have time. But yeah, and again, it's like through stuff like Facebook and Twitter, if people are going on about it, and if you think that it's coming from a reliable source, then you just investigate it, you know? So I think that that's really important. I mean, I think for all of us in our roles, we have to be on top of what's happening all the time. Like, you just can't miss a beat, because if you do, then you could potentially be missing out on developing an artist, forming a great relationship, and losing a lot of money over the next however many years, you know?
Do you listen to everything you're sent?
No. I'm just being honest. I don't have the time because my job is so crazy. Not a lot of like promoters and bookers also rep the shows, do the artwork, run the website, do the marketing, also do the marketing for the karaoke part of the venue, and design adverts for wedding magazines, for hen parties. So I have quite a lot going on, so it's a bit difficult for me. But fortunately, there's two of us doing our job. So John Paul usually would go through any of that, and if anything came up that he really liked, then we'd both listen and kind of vet it out. And if we really liked it and we had a bill that they would work on, then we would go back to them. But we get a lot of emails too, and they are important because it's, but the thing that annoys me is when you get an email and it's just like, listen to my band, we would love to play at your venue. That's annoying. But if there's a bit more bulk in the email, if they have got quotes or any sort of information to back up what they're saying, like, we played with this band before we sold out Sneaky Pete's, we like put on our own show at Henry's, we're kind of like this band, if they can kind of give you a bit more information about themselves to back up their claims and what they're wanting you to do, which is take a chance on them, then you're more likely to listen, respond, and give them the time of day. So
John,
I think it helps.
Sorry, do you check out everything that you sent?
I do, actually. But no one sends me anything.
Are you saying this
I'm very good
seriously?
at, apart from tonight, obviously, is being very anonymous. So I still find out what's going on, but I've not really gone out and said, look, this is the guy to go and speak to if you want to support, because time is so precious. I need that time for promoting the shows. I will get to artists who are out there that are emerging in Scotland, and hopefully very early, because we want to be working with high quality artists. That's what we do, and we're very interested in long term development with all the artists we work with. So we'll get there.
Did you get there with Neil in the early days?
I was aware of Neil.
Right. I think we all are.
Neil's doing an exceptionally good job of promoting himself in Scotland as it is, and of course, I'd be happy to speak further with Neil about going the next step.
Let's do it now.
Okay. Well, where do you fancy going, Neil, with your career?
Japan.
I think, Tallah, you're right. There is, you and JP, on a venue this scale, you've got to have a certain amount of your business coming through the local scene or the scene from Aberdeen and Glasgow. You've got to have your finger on the pulse, because this has got to have an identity that sells, that makes it very viable for promoters to come through here and say, that's a venue that's buzzing, there's great selections of bands on there, they're in contact with the sort of audience that the band we're promoting will identify with, so that's the venue where we want to put that show. So we're looking at venues as much as artists, and but yeah, in terms of listening to artists, I will listen to as much as my time will allow.
Neil, when you were starting out, how did you ever approach promoters? Was there a reason that you start to put on your own gigs, or the first gigs you played, how did they come about?
Well, we started putting on our own shows mainly out of necessity, because we didn't know how to approach bookers or promoters. We just didn't know. We didn't have an in. We didn't know anyone. I didn't really know any other people that were in bands when we started out. It was kind of completely dry. So
what did you do? Describe putting on your first gig.
paid £80 to Henry's Cellar Bar, booked the venue, printed up some posters, like photocopied, and asked and begged people to come to our gig. You know,
How many people came?
First shows, like, I mean, you're probably talking about 20, 30 people, but, you know, we did the usual thing, a band starting out, where everyone in the audience at the start was, you know, we knew pretty much everyone going to the gig, you know. But just over time, that sort of spreads, you know, your friends tell other friends that you don't know, and a lot of it with it being in the band is socialising with other bands and, you know, sharing audiences and what have you, locally anyway. That's
And how much did you charge for those early gigs?
£5. We were pretty kind of strict about it early on. It was
And
a
how
£5
did you do it? Do you go out with a bunch of tickets and sell them to people when you're out and about, or what's
No, it was just mainly like poster in, a little bit of flyer in. Other than that, sort of word of mouth, really. Yeah.
And did people have a chance to hear your music before then? I mean, did you have anything recorded before you started putting on the gigs?
Yeah, I mean, I'd recorded the first record was done before we played pretty much our first show, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a lot of what we were doing was, you know, the band kind of existed on like MySpace instead. You know, it was MySpace back then, and I would just upload a new song every week and sort of gauge the reaction and see what was good and what was shit, and you know. But that's about it in terms of like building up a buzz. That's kind of that was about it. It was a bit naive, but it worked to an extent, you know.
So how many gigs did you do in Henry's before you started stepping up?
I honestly can't tell you, man. It felt like we played Henry's like once a week for about a year. It really did.
And did you break even on most of those
Never.
gigs? Never.
Never.
Was there a way of making up the difference by selling CDs or other stuff, or did you just work it? That's really depressing.
We didn't like lose hundreds and hundreds of pounds because, you know, putting on a gig at Henry's, or, you know, I think it was it the Ark on the East End or other place.
Oh yeah.
You know, that was our staple shows, and you know, you were spending £80. You'd spend maybe £30 on promotion costs. You know, again, it was like I'm talking photocopied posters and flyers, so it's not a lot. So you're never losing loads of money. I mean, 30 quid's a lot of money to someone that's a student, and you know, but you know, relatively speaking, it wasn't a lot of money to lose, so it was never a massive issue.
You know, are there any things that you've done since that have helped you make the gigs a bit more profitable?
In terms of promotion, the more that can be kept sort of in-house, the better. The less risk and the less cost generally, you know. If you're doing self-promotion at a level where you're talking like kind of, you know, maybe 200 capacity venues, you don't have to shed loads of money on like beautiful glossy posters and flyers. You know, it's not generally why people are going to these venues anyway. It's not the kind of audience that you're going to attract, particularly with our style of music. It's, you know, you can do something quite lo-fi and that can be quite appealing and do its job, you know.
What about social media? I mean, is that something that you use a lot?
Not a lot.
No.
No, we don't use social media an awful lot at all. Not since actually MySpace. And the thing is, even though Bandcamp and SoundCloud, you know, they're okay, but that initial MySpace burst, I'm really nostalgic about that. I thought it was an amazing format. Like, so many of my favourite bands I find out through MySpace. I think it's maybe just a generational thing, you know. But I've not seen another format like that. You know, Facebook's close, but it doesn't have the player.
Emma, with the bands that you work with, are you aware of certain things, especially the bands at an early stage in their career, that they do to get people along to the shows, things that are effective in promoting the shows, especially outside their hometowns?
I think it's pretty much all of the above, really. Like, you get anybody that you know to come along to the gig, and if you know a band, well, if you're playing in another town, then you're hopefully playing with a band from that town who has those fans, and maybe you can do a swap or something, and you should be able to share each other's fans without cannibalising each other's fans. Social media, I think you can do a bit, and again, it's a lot of this network, and you rely on other bands to share things. You can post on other bands' walls, or you can mention other people in your tweets, and you can do this stuff, and I think that sort of works a little bit. But if you're playing in another town, you're pretty much relying on the other bands, really. Like, you're not going to have anybody there yet. And the promoter, hopefully.
Do any of you deal with local radio? How you found local media in terms of supporting talent really early on?
Radio specifically?
Any sort of media, really?
Okay, so we have a pretty good relationship with all of the broadsheets and tabloids in Scotland, and I find that even for stuff that's pretty left of center, the tabloids will still support it, which is nice. You know, that's really good. Radio, sometimes, yeah, it depends. It depends on the producer of the show. It depends what you have coming up. I mean, they don't support it in terms of promotion, but you could maybe, like, you know, sometimes we can reach out to certain producers of certain radio shows and ask them if they think that something we have coming up is a good fit. They might not even be able to play it before your show. It's rare that they'll plug your gig, you know, which I've noticed. We don't get a lot of love from radio. I mean, I'm sure it's different for John because I used to work for Regular Music and they spend a lot of money on radio advertising. You know, so if you're using these, you know, really kind of big corporate stations and you're spending money with them, they're absolutely going to talk you up. But for a lot of the artists I work with, it's more radio. It's like a BBC kind of audience. It's like Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 3 sometimes. And so they can't do competitions. It's really rare that they'll talk up one of your artists unless they have them in for an interview or in session. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes, I guess, is the answer to that question.
Neil, did you ever approach radio or journalists when you were starting out?
Yep.
Yeah,
that's the one thing that we made sure to do was make sure, like, all the local papers, like, you know, people like Skinny and List, anything with a listing in it, basically, got copies of things. We really didn't focus that much on sort of social media side of things. We wanted blogs, maybe. We made sure, but that was more through the label, the kind of label that we were on. You know, it was very sort of blog centric.
So did you do it yourself though? I mean, did you actually? Are you chewing gum? Go and spit it out because it'll come out on the microphone. It sounds really horrible.
I can't believe this is actually happening.
Oh. Thanks, man.
You met Olaf.
Tenor. I've got a pound note somewhere. Yeah?
I believe I just got my chewing gum taken off.
Oh, we've got more. You can have some in the interval. Yeah?
Well,
you can have the whole packet. It's just not while you're so you don't chomp in the microphone.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thanks.
What was the question?
Whether you'd ever approach journalists directly and just ask them if they'd be interested to come along to the gig or write about the band.
Only after they'd shown the initial interest.
Right.
Yeah. We never did the hard sell with it, if you know what I mean. It's, you know, if we got our favourable write-up for a gig, we made sure that journalist will get the next however many Meursault releases until they say a bad thing about us and then they can fuck off. Yeah, but you know what I mean? I think for musicians, that side of things always feels a little, like the sort of schmoozing side of it always feels a little bit kind of icky. You know, not many musicians enjoy doing it, so you kind of have to force yourself into the position of, you know, if a journalist comes to your show, making sure you go and speak to them. It's a little bit of a sort of cynical thing to do, but you have to do it. You know, it's important to do it.
Tallah, you used to do you were in charge of Fresh Air. Did you find that a lot of bands contacted you or kept you up to date or just invited you along to their gigs?
Yes. So Fresh Air, in case you don't know, is the student radio in Edinburgh, student radio station. I actually did a new music show, so I was always yelling out for local bands that were up and coming to send me their music, and I would play it, and I would always make a point in finding out if they had a gig coming up. So student radio is quite a good avenue. The only problem with student radio is there are not many listeners because it's student radio, and it's not that great. But I mean, we get quite a lot of support from Vic Galloway at the BBC. We got support from him when he was doing his Radio 1 show, and still now that he's doing his BBC Scotland show. If anything works, I mean, he won't like promote a gig or mention a gig every single week, because that would be bias and not fair, because we have lots of shows here, at least 5 a week usually. So, I mean, but they occasionally, if there's something that fits into that evening show, they will mention it. They played Honning Barna a couple of weeks ago and mentioned that the gig was on the following day. And we usually will listen back to Vic's show in the office, just because he's good at kind of new music. That's kind of his thing. So we'll listen to him. So that's the other side of it as well. We do read the press, and we read about up-and-coming bands, and we listen to radio shows when we can. We listen to a lot of Six Music in the office as well, because the bands that get played on Six Music are kind of the bands that would sell out this venue. The bands that are played on Radio 1 or Radio 2 are too big for us, because we're only 250 capacity venue. We like people like Dry the River, who played here and sold out, who you look after. And Dutch Uncles did well here, and we had churches, we've had loads of people, but we kind of get them when they're on the cusp and then on the way up. But it's the Six Music, really, and they mention our gigs as well. Sometimes in the evening shows, you'll get like a little mention occasionally, but usually when they play a band, they're on a tour, so they'll maybe mention like the show in Stoke, the show in Sheffield. You'll just kind of hope that somebody who's listening in Edinburgh will check it out and see if they're playing here. So
could I suggest as well, if you are putting on your own gig, there's two things. I speak as a journalist on this one. If you're putting on a gig, then try and have a hook for it. So don't be afraid to contact a journalist directly. Make sure that you actually use their name rather than going, hey. No one's just called Hay, unless it's his surname, and then it's Mr. or Mrs. Hay or Miss Hay. So actually address the person that that you want something from. That's a normal, polite thing to do, but lots of people seem to neglect that. It's quite interesting what you were saying, because it's quite familiar to me. Even though I've got a monthly column in a national newspaper, very, very few artists bother getting in touch with me. And I think that it's worth doing. Most people will reply, that I know anyway. And have something to hang it on. So maybe a launch, maybe a release. But if anyone can put out music these days, it costs 25 quid to get 2 tracks on Emu Bands out there across every digital platform that exists. So anyone that's got 25 quid and a couple of tracks can get the music out. So a release is not necessarily the strongest thing to be talking about. If your release involves giving Mexican wrestling masks to your whole audience when they come in, then suddenly it becomes a bit more interesting. There's a band called Roman Noza doing this in a few weeks. That for a journalist is like, all right, it's not just a release, it's not just a gig, it's a gig where there's going to be lots of people wearing Mexican wrestling masks. You have to stand out from the crowd. So if you are promoting your own show and no one's heard of you, then do something that's going to make people pay attention to you. Neil, you touched on the fact that it's good to build these relationships and networks with other bands. And Emma, you've been saying that if you're playing somewhere else or a band's playing somewhere else to someone else's audience, that's what they're relying on. When you started putting on shows, did you then approach bands like Eagle Isle and say, well, should we promote this together, or did you do it collectively? What was your approach?
I've never done many co-promotes with other bands. It will normally be like another promoter or, something like that. No.
So how did you do it then? Did you just offer them a deal or ask them if they wanted to come and play?
Yeah, basically it was simple as that. It was it was really social. It was a case of I think it's one of the most important things as well about when you're starting out as a band is go to as many shows locally as possible so you can figure out what bands you want to be sharing a stage with. you know, whose fans are going to be into your stuff as well as theirs, kind of thing. And just sort of through that, we'd work out who we wanted to put a show on for, and, you know, fitting bills together and stuff. It was pretty natural.
So when you went all these gigs, did you pay to get into them all, or did you do a kind of deal where they let you in for free to their gig and you let them in free for yours?
There wasn't much of that, to be honest. Like, most of the time, you wouldn't grudge paying anyway, because it's better that both people on either end pay. You know, if you know what I mean. Like, you pay to get into their gigs and they pay to get into your gigs. It's kind of like a unsaid thing that.
And did you see a lot of the bands you were going to see then coming along and appearing in your audiences?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, and that's kind of just how, like I was saying, that's kind of how it worked for us. Was, yeah, sort of mutual respect between bands, and yeah.
Now, have you done that further afield? Have you made contact with bands in Aberdeen or in Leeds? And how do you approach that?
Not to the same extent, because you can't be going out to gigs. Well, I can't be going out to gigs in, like, you know, London or Inverness or wherever every night. But the more you tour and the more you play these places, the more, you know, say we play a show in Aberdeen and a band supports us that we really like, you know, we'll strive to make sure that the next time we're in Aberdeen we can play with that band again. That kind of thing.
And how do you split the money?
In terms of?
Well, if you're playing with other bands, how do you share it out?
As a headline band being the band that's promoting the show?
Yeah.
Well, you have to accept that. Well, you kind of have to accept the fact that you'll be the last ones to get paid if that's the case. You know, you kind of treat it as a promoter would. It's, again, at that level. You know, if you only pull in £100 and you've offered the two bands that are your pals support, and you've offered them both like 50 quid, then tough. You're, you know, you kind of have to pay them, and you're left with nothing. That's the risk that you take promoting. As I think that's a case, whatever level of promotion, you know, it's always the promoter's risk, really.
I think that's something that we should come back to after the interval, because there's obviously the money aspect of it is really important, and different promoters have got different deals that they offer, and it obviously depends on what level you're at. So Emma's job is to get the best deal for the bands. So we'll talk about how to do that, but also at the same time, for those people that are looking to promote gigs, how the promoters make sure that they're covered and don't end up losing a month's rent, as many of my friends have, or just losing even small amounts of money on the gigs. Maybe there's some tips on how to avoid that too. We can move on then to the money talk and the different deals that are out there. That's where we left it just before the interval. Neil, you were saying that you always paid the other bands first. Did you ever consider just doing a straight profit share?
No. Well, not really anyway. I always kind of felt that if we were promoting the show, it was our responsibility to make sure that the bands got paid what they deserved to get paid, you know. And we were the last in the pecking order, if you know what I mean, just by default, because we were promoting the show, so it was our risk, like I say.
So did they ever organise gigs that they put you on and paid you?
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was. I imagine it was the same deal. Maybe not. Maybe I was just getting shafted the whole time, but I don't think so. But yeah.
So what kind of what would you say was a fairly typical deal? I mean, Grainne, if you're booking a new band, the local Scottish act for a support slot, what would you generally offer the act?
We always offer them a fee. We don't do the pay-to-play thing unless it's an artist. Every once in a while, you get a band who actually request that. It's unusual, but it happens. I think that the reason why is probably because they know 100 people who would go to pay to see them play. So it's worth them taking a stack of tickets or us creating a code for their customers to buy tickets, so we know and we can pay them a certain amount based on that. But that all has to be cleared with the booking agent because it affects the cost and it affects the break. So what I typically do is I create a budget for a support artist that's approved by the booking agent, and it's usually not a lot of money. It's £50 is the kind of standard. It can go up to 200 depending on the size of the room. Like I think, you know, in the ABC and the Barrowland, we've maybe paid even up to 300 for a local support. But you know, it really just depends. But there is always a fee offered.
And with that £50, does that do they get something to eat? Is there anything else that you throw in with that?
I give them a rider and a guest list.
Okay.
too.
So what would, you know, for the absolute basic, what would be £50 with a rider? Is that some food or?
Crate of beer, some crisps, some fruit, a couple bottles of wine.
Okay.
Little bottle of vodka.
Well, that's more
Some
than a lot,
soft
yeah.
drinks. We're good.
And in terms of the guest list, what's reasonable for a band to expect then?
Well, it depends. It depends on the size of the room. It depends on how much space we have available. You know, if you're at a fire limit, you can't start knocking down walls to accommodate 20 guests for the support band. But we give them a guide of like, it's usually a minimum of like 5 guests, right?
Okay.
There's like 4 or 5 people in the band. But if they're like, you know, my mom and dad want to come or whatever, we'll try and accommodate them up to like 10 or 12. But that's if we really, really like them.
Okay. What about you, John? What's a typical regular deal for a support act? I mean, a singer, songwriter, or a solo artist, or a band. I mean, does it make a difference? Would you say? Do you look at how many people are in an act and then base what you're going to offer them on that?
Not really. It's very. I mean, it's very almost identical to what Grainne is saying there. I would say it is dependent on the size of the room. Minimum I think I've ever paid anyone is £50 support, and that could be a solo artist or it could be a band. And again, similarly, I think for local supports, 250, 300 is by the most we've been asked to pay. But there's also some leeway there because also it would depend on what the artist that you're putting on as support is worth, what their contribution is to the overall show budget as well. So if it really made sense for me to be breaking the bank on a band that was on first, I wouldn't hesitate to do that if it was good for the show overall.
So when you say good for the show, do you mean that they're going to bring in 100 people to?
Yeah, if there's
to
a
the
good,
gig?
if there was potentially, I'm not saying that it's just going to be their friends and family that come. They could be a band with a general reputation and following that, you know, adds to the bill and does more to it than it suddenly becomes more attractive than the sum of the parts by having that artist on. That can happen. It's fun when it does. Quite a lot of time they will have either the agent themselves will have a relationship with the band that they want on, or that the artist they are the agent for, that artist has a relationship and wants a certain artist to be with them on a show. So we could be factoring that in with the amount of the gross for the show, the number of tickets sold times the ticket price. We're factoring that in from the beginning, and and then any fee can happen as long as we're talking that from the outset. What's common practice, though, is that either 50 or £100 will be put in right at the beginning because neither party, the promoter or the agent, will know who's going to be the support yet.
Okay. Tallah, what's the kind of typical deal that you would do here in the Electric Circus?
There's not a typical deal. So a support, the least we would pay a support would be £30. If it was a band we'd never worked with before, who was a local, we quite often would offer them a ticket split. So we'd give them a bunch of tickets to sell, like up to 30 tickets, and we say every ticket you sell, you get £2, and then you get whatever is greater. So they get either the £30 if they don't sell more than 15 tickets, or if they sell all 30, they get £60 instead. So we have a variance. But then when we're working with bigger agents, it's as soon as you get asked to offer on a show, they say offer based on this ticket price, this amount of national advertising, which covers like your Mojo, your Q, NME kind of advertising for the whole tour, and then they'll say and £50 for your support, or it can sometimes be up to £200 for the support. It depends on the caliber of the headline band and who they've got. Every show is different. It really depends, because we do kind of grassroots local bills, and we also do bigger bands. We've had like Peace and Palma Violets, all these kind of up and coming bands, and we have the Twang, and we've got the Sunshine Underground coming soon, and they all had much higher support fees built into the budget before we'd even started working out a costing for the show. So I mean, everything is different, which is why our jobs are quite exciting, because every show is completely different. And
at which stage do you stop doing the here's a bunch of tickets thing and just offer people a flat fee?
Flat fees are better, but a lot of bands, if they're starting out, they want to prove themselves
Right.
to a venue or to a promoter that they can bring people to their show, and then if there's something in it for them. But I mean, I'm talking about bands that are brand new that we've maybe never worked with before. If it's a band that we know and we've worked with before, then they'll get a flat kind of guaranteed fee. But it just varies. It depends on who it is.
I think it's really important just to add there, when we're talking about a guarantee, it is normally versus a percentage of income. So it's a minimum guarantee that a band's being offered. It's not there's £100, and if we sell 100 tickets at £10, you're still just getting £100. Yeah. It's against the number of tickets and income that you're selling. So there's an additional reward for more tickets being sold to the artist.
Yeah, it's more often than not, it's versus 80%. So it means that, so if a band was guaranteed £300 as their fee at the end of it, if you've sold out, and after your costs, if the net is more than £300, then they get whatever's the higher amount, essentially.
That's really hard to understand.
It's hard to understand. Yeah,
Emma, you must
band,
deal with
the
this all
band.
the time. How does it work? Can you explain the verses thing in 2 sentences?
Maybe really long sentences. It's not actually that complicated. It's even if you sell 3 tickets, you will get your £300. Yeah. But if after all of the money the promoter has spent, including on venue hire and the other bands, you've made £1,000, then the headline band will get 80%, i.e. £800.
So are there any deals that people should really be aware of that are common but should definitely be avoided? Come on, you're all pretty sort of... you're all had a view on this backstage, so who's going to start?
Right. What you're alluding to is pay to play.
Well, no, what I'm alluding to is, a bunch of tickets, but not like the ticket deal that... Tallah is mentioning, that and pay to play. I mean, I think there is a sort of slight difference there. But let's start with the pay to play. What's the typical thing there that people should avoid? What's the usual way for bands to end up losing money in that situation?
So the band hands over money before they've even set foot in the venue, and then
paying to play somewhere on top of the venue.
And I think we got a little bit confused because I wasn't talking about a self-promote. I was talking about somebody who calls themselves a promoter, says, yeah, I'll book you to pay my night, which I'm promoting. However, you have to buy these 50 tickets from me at £6 each, and then you give me back half of that, regardless of however many you've sold. Or you hand over the money up front, I think. Sorry? Well, chances are, because it tends to be new bands who haven't played very much, they're probably going to lose anyway because they're playing on their innocence, their ambition and their naivety. It's really evil. It's really evil.
The promoter is asking you to guarantee that there are going to be 50 people in the room.
And you pay for them, whether they come or not.
You pay for that 50 tickets. Simple as that. And it's fucked.
I don't know that many people that have done that, though. I don't know that many promoters that have done it.
Mikey,
and if they are, they're promoters that you've probably never heard
Mikey
of.
can shed some light on this. This happened to you, didn't it, when you were like 17 or something with a promoter in Glasgow? Do you want to kind of enlighten us how he ripped you off?
Yeah, they just offered us a show, but you've got to guarantee
And I mean, I guess this is something that, Emma, you're in a good position to talk about.
I think you kind of get a feeling, that's not very helpful, but I think that you probably all know what I mean as well.
Do you, from your perspective, Neil, what should someone ask if they're approaching or they're discussing a gig with a promoter? What sort of things would you put in your initial email or your initial response? Are there any key things you always have at the forefront of your mind?
It depends what kind of level you're talking about, because obviously, like, the sort of demands and requests from a band, depending on what kind of size of venue, they're going to vary. But do you mean like sort of, a sort of start-up band?
Yeah, I think so. If you're, say someone approaches you as a young act, and they want to give you a gig, or they're talking about giving you a gig, what do you think you can reasonably expect as the act?
I think the two important things are, well, one's an open line of communication with them, and the other one is, like you were saying, Emma, it's just transparency in terms of the finances and the costings of it. If they're saying they're going to pay you a certain amount, find out why, to work out the sort of ins and outs of like how that money is getting to you and where it's coming from. In terms of a band working with a promoter, I think a really important one is rider request, in terms of what you actually. It's a hard question to answer, but it's what do you deserve to get?
Do all of you know what a rider is? Right. For those who don't, that's what you've got two types of rider. You've got one that's your technical rider, so that's the specifications of the amplifiers or other sort of elements like that. And then there's the food and drink, which can add enormously to a promoter's costs, as we were talking about earlier on. But
I'm just gonna interrupt you there, because actually there's a really common misconception. The catering rider is paid by the promoter if the show makes a loss. The catering rider is paid by the artist, in effect, if the show makes a profit. So it's really important as an artist to not just think of that stuff in the dressing room as free booze, free snacks. If the show's profitable, you're paying for that because that's a show cost. So be reasonable about what you're asking for. Do you really need it?
Yeah, we had King Charles here a while back, and it was sold out, and their fee was reasonable, but they were gonna break the percentage and get quite a good fee from it. And then on a couple of days before, it was like, we want a George Foreman grill, we want fresh meat. Honestly, we bought them like 4 packs of beef mince, and they were upstairs in the dressing room making burgers. After
what, with
they
a
got
George
off
Foreman
stage.
grill upstairs?
Yep.
Wow.
We didn't have a grill. I was like, I can't provide that. But their tour manager was like, don't worry about it. We've got a George Foreman grill. I'll bring it with me. So this is ridiculous because, that catering costs so much money, and there was a buyout as well. And essentially, as John is saying, is it ate into what they could have walked away with as their fee. So
because just
it
being
was
realistic,
outrageous.
though. If we were talking about people starting up promotion for the first time and booking local acts, hospitality rider shouldn't come into it at all, really. You shouldn't even consider guaranteeing someone a rider. If you're talking like a small venue, local band, rider is the last thing you want to be worrying about. You want to make sure the band gets paid something. You want to make sure that they're treated well. And I think that's the key thing with it. It's that word, it's hospitality. Be nice to the bands. Be upfront with the bands as a promoter. If you can only afford to buy the bands like a pint a head and a bag of crisps, tell them that and tell them why that's all you can afford. And they will understand. People aren't dickheads. It's like, you will get 1 out of 10 that's, thinks they're Motley Crue and like, but, generally that kind of attitude doesn't really, or as far as I've experienced, doesn't really exist. You want to make sure the show goes as well as it possibly can, that the finances are in check. Yeah, exactly. It's quite easy to lose sight of these things, though. As soon as the first time, as a band, the first time you get asked what your hospitality rider specifications are, you shit a brick. It's like, what? It's like, you know, it's like...
Can you remember?
Beer, lots of beer and food and stuff. You know, it's your natural inclination is to take advantage of it. But I would advise people as a band, if you're doing that, ask for the absolute minimum. Because as John says, it's like, you know, it's all coming out of your pocket, really.
I'm sure Lloyd Cole won't mind me sharing this with anyone at all. Last time I did shows with him, the first night his rider was a bottle of water and a banana. The second night he said, John, don't buy the banana. Because Lloyd knows that's his money he's asking me to spend on his behalf.
It's quite funny because I was going to ask what the most outrageous rider request is, but it's the absolute antithesis of it, a bottle of water. Have you had anyone rocking up with a George Foreman grill, Grainne?
I haven't had anybody rock up with the George Foreman grill, but we often get asked for toasters. And loads of bands ask for toasters.
Like to take away or just for there to be one there?
Just for the one to be
I
one
think
there.
That's fine.
I think that's all right.
These are kind of the weird things that it's okay to do because they're things you would have in your house to bring. But
yeah, right? They just want some toast with peanut butter.
Yeah.
You know, like they're traveling and whatever. And then we get asked for stuff that you think... You're like, that's really odd, but actually, if you're on the road for 6 weeks and you don't have a lot of time to do things like laundry, for example, we get asked for 9 pairs of pants and 9 pairs of socks, like plain black t-shirts. We get asked, like, they're just like, go to Primark and just get loads of pants and socks. Public Enemy tour with like 20 people, and we get them pants, socks, and t-shirts every single time.
Public Enemy are wearing your pants.
Yeah, black pants, black socks, black t-shirts.
Are you ever tempted to get them any really ridiculous pants, like with strange patterns or anything? Or do they specify what type they want?
Do you know, I can't remember what band it was, but I got a band I think it was Battles. I get them ridiculous pants and socks when they ask for it all the time because like we're friendly, we've been working together for years, and I can kind of get away with it, but they love it. You know, they think it's cool that, you know, I go to Asda and get them.
To be honest,
really
I think if you're asking for underwear in your rider, you get what you're fucking given. Yeah. You know, it's like...
As long as it's not second hand, yeah. Emma, what sort of... do you have any experience of people, artists going, I really want this in my rider, but where you're just like shaking your head going, that's just too much?
Not so much. People asking for things that are funny but not expensive. Like people want exotic sauces. People want postcards of the local place. Dry the River went through a phase where they wanted sharks because they had a shark on their album cover. And at the moment, they've got a different cocktail for every night of the week. Is it Monday? We want vodka. Is it Tuesday? We just want lots of red wine. And all of these different... But it doesn't cost any more than it would ordinarily cost. I think the most outrageous one I saw that was clearly a joke, but somebody did try to honour it, was that We Are Scientists asked for a puppy on their rider. And I went to a festival that they were playing once, and the promoter was apologising, bending over backwards, because he hadn't been able to source a puppy for this band.
So it's okay just to go back and say that's a bit ridiculous. I can't fulfill it. Okay.
Yeah, and say, look, this show is pretty tight already. If we get you all of the things, you're definitely not going to make any extra. If we get you this, this, and this, you will. And I have a few bands, particularly small bands with no money, who will say, I don't want any beer, I don't want any wine, just get us some pizza, just get us something to eat.
From a promoter's perspective, what you look for in a band, what you expect a band to do. And also, I think we've touched on this, but I'd really like to know what a band can expect a promoter to do. What is absolute basics for an artist when it comes to working with a promoter? I mean, Grainne, what would you say is fair for an artist to expect from you?
I think it would be fair for an artist to expect me to have the show on sale. Make sure that that the tickets are just distributed through the box office outlets accordingly, that the show is advertised, that it's in an adequate and safe venue, that I don't oversell the show. It is kind of basics, but that's the kind of important thing, and that I'm working them effectively. And if I do kind of run into an area where I feel like, or where they maybe are questioning their sales, like perhaps this territory isn't selling as well as somewhere only a few hours away, then I'm sure that artists would expect me to liaise with the agent, the management, the label, the pluggers, to make sure that we can all really do our bit to develop them to their full potential in this territory, you know, because, you know, we all love music. We're all kind of in this for the right reasons. We started because we love it. But at the end of the day, everybody needs to make money. And making money is, you know, that's kind of why we're in this too. We need to be able to live. So I think that is what an artist expects out of me, is to make them do a good job making them as much money as possible.
Neil, what would you expect from a promoter? What would be the absolute basics that, you know, someone here looking for a gig gets a gig from a promoter? What would you expect them to do? And do you actually put that in writing? Do you send an email saying, well, are you going to advertise it? Where are you going to sell the tickets? How are you going to promote it?
A lot of the time with that kind of stuff, it's a bit of a leap of faith. You know, particularly if you're working with a new promoter that you've not worked with before, you're kind of just going by, you know, generally word of mouth, or, you know, someone's put you on to them.
Are there any ways to safeguard that or reduce it from being a leap of faith?
Just having a look at what they've done in the past, you know, scoping them out. You know, you should never really take a gig with a promoter that you know nothing about. It's fine to take a gig with a promoter, obviously, that you've never worked with before, but, you know, you should have some background of what they do, the kind of bands that they work with, the kind of bands that they have success working with, the venues that they work with, you know, all this kind of stuff. Above and beyond that, it's just sort of basic requirements, like, yeah, are they going to advertise the show? Is the venue suitable for the act? That comes up more often than not, actually, especially at lower levels, you know, when you're sort of working your way up, turn up at venues with a 6-piece band to sit on a stage about the size of that table. That happens an awful lot.
So how do you prevent that from happening then?
Well, yeah, you're right. You send out, you advance it, and by that you send out, you know, advance information. You give them your requirements. You tell them this is the size of the stage that we need. It's just kind of, it's about, from a band's point of view, it's about knowing your act inside and out. You know, knowing your own requirements.
I think this is it's a really important point. It's to actually to communicate with the people you're working with. That includes, if possible, the sound engineer as well, so that they know what's
totally
coming
fundamental. And I mean, if you sort of break it down, what you're doing with your relationship with a promoter is, whether or not they like your band or think you're amazing or not, you're offering them a service. You know, and if it gets to the point where you know, they don't have the requirements for you, then it kind of breaks down completely.
And John, are there any other things that you would add that someone has a right to expect a promoter to do? I mean, it's just so that when that isn't being done, you can call them up and go, why aren't you doing this? Or why am I listed on your website, for example? Or
I think a really important one is, somebody's mentioned already, is just to be available to answer questions and not to just ignore the questions that you have. So if I'm working with an artist, sometimes they'll be on a kind of, not through the advancing process, normally through the advancing process actually, which is where you're going through everything on the rider which you've got before, hopefully, you make the offer for the show, so you're completely aware of what the artist needs in order to fulfill the show. Sometimes you don't get that in advance, and sometimes that's because the agent doesn't get that in advance from the band. So we're both taking a kind of leap in the dark, and then when the rider comes through, we've got a budget that we're all working from, and we can discuss that. But if any of those issues come up, you've got to respond as a promoter very, very quickly, because there's nothing more frustrating than just being left hanging on and not knowing the reason that you're hanging on. It's just silence when you're asking a question. Is not good. You've got to respond as a responsible promoter very, very quickly. So I would expect to be available, you know, on a daily basis, even if it's the weekend, between the point of booking the show and the show happening.
In terms of what the artists can do to help make the show a success, what do you think is reasonable for a promoter to expect from the artist? Neil, you're an artist and a promoter. If you're the promoter and you're working with other artists, do you expect them to put anything into it, or do you just expect them to turn up and play?
I would expect them to let their fans, their existing fans, know as much as possible that the gig's happening, where it's happening, how much tickets are, and how they choose to do that's absolutely up to them. You know, some bands use Facebook, some bands hate Facebook, you know, but you want to see a concerted effort that the band is letting their fans know.
And are there any things that particularly help you if you're promoting the gig from the bands, like having photographs or promotional material, or does it not make too much difference to the way you work?
It helps if the band's got an idea of their own identity, and you know they've got a collection of the photos that they like to use. It's always nicer if the band sort of comes forward with the images that they want used, or the particular song that they, because it shows that they care. You know, it shows that they've actually thought about it and that they've considered it.
Grainne, do you request anything from acts when you book them? Are there certain fundamental things that you'd expect them to have, and if you don't see it's readily available, that you would go back and say, look, could you provide me with some press shots? Could you provide me with a biog or something like that?
Yeah, basically what I ask for initially on every confirmation is advertising assets, so artwork, JPEGs, biogs that are suitable for web and print use, and logos and things like that. If I don't get them, which can happen, you know, it's not unusual for an artist to just, you know, sometimes the artist isn't even giving it to the booking agent. And the booking agent is, you know, I mean, Emma, you'll be working day and night, booking tours throughout Europe, Japan, Australia. You don't have all the time in the world to sit and hound one manager for one JPEG.
Yeah, but you still have to do it though.
Yeah, you still do it. But every once in a while, you know, you just can't access that material. And so what I do is I just say, fine, I'm going to be creative. And I do it myself. And I'll pick things off the internet, you know, because sometimes you're desperate and sometimes you just have to work with what you have. But it's nice if you can get those assets.
What would you say would be fundamental, Emma, if you were with one of your acts, if you were taking in promoters, what's the thing that the promoter is most likely to request?
Well, you need stuff they can use straight away. So you do need a photo and you do need a music link. If possible, you can use a video link. If they've got a logo, please give them a logo, especially if it's a support. I had one band going on tour supporting somebody else once and they didn't have a logo. So please make me a logo. No, we're really against logos. They were this sort of anarchist band. I'm going to do it in Comic Sans. And then they sent me a logo. But I think also, as much as the promoter has to be available, I think the band should be available. Like if tickets are moving slowly, you get, I don't know, maybe some of you know this, but you'll get a ticket sales update every Monday and every Friday, so everybody knows how well or how badly that show is doing. So if the promoter knows that there is something in their town, there is some radio show, there is some website, there is something that the band can do to help move those tickets a little bit faster, then the band should be willing to help from their side, because the promoter's taking the financial risk. But in the end, the band is going to benefit more than anybody else. And I think some bands are really reluctant to do that, and it's damaging themselves in the end.
Tallah, what makes your day? I mean, if you could name, say, 3 things that are going to make you feel very positively inclined about an act, other than their music, what makes it easier for you to promote them?
An up-to-date biography, preferably with press quotes from legitimate sources. So local newspapers and like online sites like the Line of Best Fit, you know, people that you trust what they say. So quotes for me are really important. We try and stick quotes on all of our posters because we like to think that if someone's in a cafe or a bar and they see the poster, they might never have heard of the band before. A lot of the bands we work with, people don't really know them. So we're trying to make you know them. So if there's a quote that says, they're like Belle and Sebastian meets the Smiths, then they might like Belle and Sebastian or the Smiths and they might go home and listen to them.
God.
So that's that. I know you hate the
That'd be the last
Smiths.
fucking thing I'd go to, yeah.
Well, so you wouldn't be there, but Belle and Sebastian and Smiths fans maybe would. also a tour manager that it works both ways. So it's important that the promoter responds quickly, but if the tour manager doesn't, that's also a problem. And then high-res images and logos, because the quicker you can get started on promo for online use and for print, the better.
Now, I bang on, there's two things I bang on about at every panel. One is don't send mass mail outs, and the other one is just learn about photography. Not that you have to take great photos, but learn not just about what the high resolution means, but also about the size. I got sent a photograph by Scotland's second largest promoter, and a designer sent it to me, of all things, and it was low res, so his picture's not appearing in the article that I've just written because I didn't have time to chase up a professional designer. So this goes on all the time. 90% of people, and doesn't matter if they're bookers, promoters, industry people, artists, will tend to screw up when it comes to pictures. It's really easy to sort.
The most annoying thing is when you get sent a picture and you open it up on your computer, and at 100% of its size, it's this big, and you need to make it into a poster that's this big. As soon as you start stretching that, the pixels go crazy, and then it just looks terrible. And you wouldn't want to go to that
Yeah,
show.
I had someone do that. I was like, can I have it a bit bigger? So they just stretched it. That totally defeats the purpose. Now, I know that Edinburgh College and Napier both have photography departments. Just go and ask one of them. Just go and ask one of the lecturers if you're in doubt. But it is probably the most important thing after the music is to have a decent photograph in pretty much right across the board, whatever sort of areas you're doing. Now, let's get through some of these questions quickly. For a venue of this size, what would you prioritize in a campaign? Print ads, Facebook ads, or flyering?
Posters and listings, sending out listings, updates with all, well, so you get your up-to-date biographies, you stick them into your listings, and you make sure you send them out to everybody. I've got a press contact list. It's got everybody on it, from Vic Galloway to the guy that runs the What's on Edinburgh blog, to the list, to the skinny. So you just have to get it out to as many people as possible. So trying to get people to write about your shows. The Metro support us loads with their publication and their What's On section. Usually 2 or 3 times a week we'll get some sort of mention, which is great. Listings and posters covering the city, I guess, and Facebook. Those are the 3 things.
But not Facebook ads.
Not Facebook ads. We don't
Okay.
we don't really do those. We've tried, but it didn't really make a difference. It just kind of wasted money.
Have you got any other experience with Facebook ads? Do they work for you?
I use them, sorry.
Does it work? Yeah.
Yeah. We have a great return on the Facebook ads. And there's like total Facebook analytics that tell you how many people are actually viewing it. And I always see a jump, you know? It doesn't matter the size of show. They work for me. I've had really good luck with them.
Do you think these things, to what extent do these different approaches depend on the type of music that you're making? I mean, would you say that if you're in a sort of band that's doing hardcore punk, you're better off doing flyers or social media? Are there any things that...
I'd say, yeah, it does make a difference. I mean, we do all different genres of shows in this venue, from like Alpha Beat. We had Alpha Beat play here, and we've had Example, and we've had like really heavy hip hop acts to really poppy solo acoustic stuff. It depends what kind of show you're doing. If you're Bannerman's are mostly rock shows. I don't even think it's 100 capacity. It's small. It's kind of under a bridge, you know. It's grimy. Doing like printed flyers and going out to places where there are rock nights on and flyering those, that's actually targeting your audience. So if it's like really niche and more kind of underground and alternative, then definitely you've got to try and tap into that market. And they're not going to be necessarily on Facebook or reading the skinny or the list. So it just depends.
What makes a great poster or flyer?
feel like they're all
Or
directed at
doesn't
me.
it matter anymore?
Well, so when I started, I wanted the venue, when I started here, I wanted the venue to have a look so that you see the poster and you know what's happening at that venue. And there are other promoters which are the same, like Synergy, you have your own look, Regular, you've got your own look, PCL and DF all have, you see the poster and you know who the promoter is, I'd like to think. So, and they're all kind of high quality and quite shiny and gleaming. But if you're doing like this underground rock show, you want something that's like, black and white and angry and maybe just printed. It's all dependent on the show, so it can be important. But I mean, we're a venue. It's unusual that a venue does as many shows as we do. It's not the norm. We work quite closely with DF, so they kind of a lot of shows they won't take a risk on, because at this size of venue you don't really make any money from putting on shows here. It's more that you're nurturing a band and you might work with them in the future when they're playing bigger venues. So we kind of take the shows that they're maybe, I don't know, it's a bit of a risk, and we'll put them on.
I just heard about posters, and this is a huge bugbear of mine, is when you've got it up at A3 size or A2, stick it on a wall, go to the other side of the room, can you read it?
Yeah.
It's a poster. You're trying to tell people about your band.
While I'm bitching about designers, as I was a few minutes ago, one of the things that happens with designers a lot is that they don't think about the actual purpose of this, which is for people to read it, see who's playing, and to see where the gig is. You know, there's been many times where I've had to take a designer and go, that's a beautiful font, but I can't read what it fucking says. So please do something with it so that I can look and it catches my eye and I can see straight away the name of the act and preferably the venue. And then, you know, the things like the ticket price and other things, or where they get the tickets from, they can be a bit smaller, but you want the basic information to be on there. And then you can also look at the types of images and colors as well. So I think that's hopefully answers that question.
Don't please get someone else to look at it before you put them up, because I've seen posters with the 23rd of October or without a date on at all. And you just mentioned where to buy tickets, but I think that's actually really important, especially if you're a new band and you've maybe got tickets on Music Glue and we got tickets in nowhere else. Because some people are used to just buying their tickets from Ticketmaster or C, and they go think, I'd like to see that band. So they go to their ticket websites and they're not on sale there. So do put your ticket link on the bottom of your poster.
Yeah, it's a very good idea as well. Look at Music Glue's one. We use Eventbrite for our things. It's a really and this is something we've not even touched on, but promoting gigs, ticketing, especially, it's one thing selling physical tickets. It's an amazing thing when you get 100 people and you have all their emails. So those of you who didn't sign up to the mailing list, we will be keeping you up to date in future. Now, that sort of thing is really valuable because you can see who's been to your gigs before. You can, if there's certain acts that you think they'll like, you can target those people. And the information that you get and you have access to is incredibly valuable, both for bands and promoters. I mean, there's, if you as a band know who's bought your tickets for a certain show or an act, I keep saying bands, but I mean any musician, if you know who's bought tickets for your show in one city, when you're going back there, you can send them a personal email and say, we're coming back in a few weeks. Here's the ticket link. You could offer them a discount, anything along those lines. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind the different ticketing services, because there's quite a lot. It's always good to have them in a shop if you think that that's where your fans are going to be buying the tickets or people that you want to appeal to. But the online thing is great. Now, I've got one about how did you start promoting? Grainne, what made you start to promote?
I started promoting, I was 18, and basically I was really lucky. I just moved back to Scotland. I got to Edinburgh, and I started working at the Liquid Room and Bannerman's, not having anything to do with the gigs. But I had mentioned to the manageress of the Liquid Room and to the owner that, I really wanted to put on gigs, and I have like a kind of encyclopedic memory when it comes to music. I listen to a lot of music, pretty geeky about it. And when their booker was leaving, they were only a few months later, they said, you know what, why don't you just take the job? Why don't you do it? We'll show you what to do over the next 3 to 6 months. You're going to hate it, or you're going to hate us. And then you'll be really good at it and everything will be fine. And I was like, okay. I was terrified, and I did it. And then Regular poached me. And then ATP poached me from Regular, and then I set up Synergy. So that was basically, I didn't really have a choice. It was something I wanted to do. It landed in my lap, so I did it.
Tallah, how did you start promoting?
When I was doing Fresh Air, the student radio station, we did events to raise money for the station. And I think the first gig I put on was a John Peel night. And it was at the Bongo Club, and it was really busy, and it was great fun, and I kind of got this buzz from it. And then I was like, I want to do this all the time. And there was another guy that did Fresh Air who had just set up a promotions kind of night called This Is Music. And I just asked, I was like, can I come and DJ one night after the bands have finished? So I went along, and then I was like, I want to come and promote gigs with you. Is that cool? So then I ended up doing that. So we used to put on a gig every month at Henry's Cellar Bar. And then we moved to Sneaky Pete's, and we started doing a gig every Friday, which was a lot of work. And then I worked for Cab Vol for a while doing PR there. So I did PR for all their gigs and clubs, and then a job opened up here.
Now, more than ever, we're booking tour supports even for tiny venues, like kind of those entry-level tours for artists who are just kind of working their first single or EP, who are doing a national tour. Even they're bringing tour supports with them. It isn't often that I get the opportunity to book a local support, but if I can, then I do. And I think that everybody, like I'm pretty sure John's in the same boat as me. It's really, really difficult, you know? So when we can, if it's possible, what we do try and do a few times a year is kind of find local artists who we really like, who we do want to create a relationship with and develop over time, and put together like a 3 or 4 band bill in a place that's affordable where everybody can still get paid, and do it that way and actually promote them properly as artists on their own, as opposed to just sticking them on as a local support.
Well, how hard is it for someone to get put on a support with you? A local act?
Hypothetically, any tour comes through, sometimes there's no support, sometimes there's support on the entire tour. That's 90% of the time. Because if you're in a big venue you're as an agent, maybe Emma, you'll correct me on this, is my impression of it, is that if I'm an agent and I'm putting out one of my artists into a 1,000 capacity room, if I can get one of my other junior artists or lower artists, developing artists is probably a better way of putting it, in front of 1,000 people, I will try and make that happen. I'll explain to the artist this is a good thing to do for their development, and if they can do that, we'll get them the whole UK tour. So I understand why national touring supports happen. When we do get the opportunity to, when we're asked to provide a local support, it tends to happen quite late in the day, which is quite frustrating instead of being told from the outset. And then what tends to happen is that I have a little frantic flurry around my usual go-to people, who I have, who I trust, who I know will do a good job. But before I go, as I'm working through that list, I'm looking at the headline artist and saying, what will be a suitable style of music to be here? So that is going to exclude quite a lot of artists from the beginning.
So I think this is a really good point. If you're in a band and you see an act that's touring and you think you'd fit well on their bill, then get in touch with John or Tallah or Grainne and see if you can get onto that support. Getting in touch with the band's a really good point as well.
The worst that's going to happen is I'm going to say, I'm really sorry, I don't know if there's a national tour support yet, or there is already a national tour support, we've just not been able to announce it yet. So you're going to get one of those two, one of three responses, that's two of them. The other one is, I'll keep you in mind until we know the outcome of that, and then I'll find out whenever that is, John, can you put some suggestions forward for local support? It's not my choice 99% of the time. I'm providing suggestions to the artist agent. They will normally punt them upstairs to the artist management for approval if that's the deal that's happening, or it may just be a fail-safe at the agency.
But we're talking main support, right? So let's say it's normally a 3-band bill, and unless it's a huge tour, then you've probably only got one, only the main support would tour with the band, so you've still got some leeway on the opener. I really like having the first band on be a local band, and I will normally trust the promoters on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's good to know that that's not always the situation, and quite a lot of the time we are only doing 2-band bills.
All right, so you've talked a lot about why it wouldn't be possible. So what they want to know is how it would be possible. So let's go back to that. Select an act where you might be suitable. Be ready at short notice to do it, because very often that's when those sorts of requests come in. Because as you've said, it can be something that's got to be done quickly. And if you do get that, make yourself available, make the promoter aware of it, make the band that you like or the act that you like aware of it. And if it comes up, don't say, oh, my drummer can't get the evening off work. Take the opportunity and find someone to cover or get yourself another drummer. I think, Neil, you're probably in a position as a musician to explain well how you went about it, how you went about growing that audience. You've already mentioned playing in Henry's almost every week for a year. You've also mentioned going to lots of other gigs and building relationships with other musicians. Is there anything else you would suggest on this front?
It is a really difficult one to answer because there's so many sort of variables in that, in terms of like how do you expand the audience. It's, well, keep making good music and make the music as available as you possibly can. There's yeah, it's a tricky one from a band's point of view.
Have you got, in terms of how you managed to develop your fan base across Scotland, are there any things you would recommend people do other than contacting other bands? Or hosting other bands from other cities?
Well, that's another one. I mean, in terms of sort of spreading yourself out, like out with the city that you're from, apply all the things that you've learned in your to further afield. For example, I'm saying go and see as many bands as you possibly can in your hometown. Do the exact same with your neighbouring cities. Get through to Glasgow. If you're from Edinburgh, get through to Glasgow as much as you can, see bands. If you're ever, if you're down in London for a trip, visiting a relative, try and squeeze in a gig. Just in terms of the general music scene across the country, like, it's all about finding where you fit into that. What your band has to offer and the venues that you would want to play and would want to have you play. Figure out what these things are.
Emma, have you got any tips on this front?
I think maybe figure out who's got the fans you want. Like, who do you think that you are similar enough to, or have all the same things about you would appeal to people as band X, and then figure out where their fans hang out, and that might be at a bar, or it might be at a specific club night, or it might be online. It might be any, like, it depends on genre, it depends on the band, and I think maybe go there. And I know that sounds a little bit facile and a little bit vague as well, but I think if you go to that bar and you hand out your flyers, or if you go to that club night and you say, talk to the DJ afterwards and say, can you play my thing? Or if you go to that, whatever it is online, those people, and just start talking with those people, I think possibly that's a way to do it.
You went on tour with, who was it again?
So, clap your hands.
Clap your hands, say yeah. How did that happen?
We were doing a tour of Europe the previous year, and our European booking agent managed to get us a support slot with them in Cologne. And again, it's just that sort of social side of it. We made sure to speak to all the band backstage and, you know, get to know them, let them get to know us. And a couple of months down the line, they got in touch with our manager and asked if we wanted to do their entire support on the next tour. And it was as simple as sitting down, having a chat, and, you know, oh, you like that band? Oh, I like that band. Oh, you've seen that film? I've seen that film. You know, it's that kind of thing. And, you know, you go home and you're Facebook friends. And it's, you know, so you keep yourself
So
in.
you do like social media then?
Shut up.
Just saying.
But along the same lines, if you're playing a festival or something, do go and talk to the other bands. You'd be amazed how many people don't. Just shut themselves up in their dressing room and don't talk to anybody else. Go and do it.
At the same time, though, I would say
incredible.
it's like there's a really thin line between being social and doing the hard sell.
Yeah, don't go and
it's-
walk into their dressing room.
Yeah, clutching CDs and flyers. I love you guys. Yeah.
Sign me.
Yeah.
Yeah, be reasonable. That helps as well. I think the other thing with that is if you do find yourself in a room with a band that you really like, stay reasonable and cool. Don't be giving them the hard sell at 2 a.m. Engage with them on the same level. Don't be sort of trying to impress them or be something that you're not. And I think that one thing that we should mention is that we've touched on this with band swaps and gig swaps. We unveiled something at our Wide Days convention in April called Off Axis, which is going to be piloted very soon. And it's a Brazilian initiative that involves band swapping gigs or support slots. So if one band, say from Edinburgh, wants to play in Aberdeen, or you can go and support an act that draws a crowd of at least 80 people in Aberdeen, and that host act gets credits that they can then use to go and play in another town or city. And it's been a real success in Brazil. They organized something like, or facilitated 6,000 gigs last year in Brazil. So although that formal structure hasn't totally been established yet and it's not up and running yet, it is something to keep your eye on. And in the meantime, it's totally worth getting in touch with musicians in other parts of the country and looking at you organizing gigs and hosting them and vice versa. There's a band called Chasing Owls that did that really, really well. They were selling out Sneaky Pete's just by organizing their own shows and selling tickets to their friends. And with the money that they made, they actually brought an act up from London and were able to cover all their costs and give them a fee. So those are, don't necessarily rely on other people to do it, because you can do it yourselves, and you do have access to venues. I mean, Tallah, one thing to ask you is, do you ever give people deals on this place? I mean, is it other
in terms
days?
of hire?
Yeah, or ever day, or if there's someone can guarantee a certain number of folk.
We used to do it by the number of folk, but that didn't make us any money necessarily.
Right.
So we now we mostly just do it for kind of local bands that want to put on their own show, because we think it's pretty optimistic that they want to put on their own show in a 250 capacity venue if it's the first time they've done the show. But if we really like the band, we use a sliding scale, but it's based on bar spend, because at the end of the day we need to cover our costs. Just having this place open with all the electricity on and the lights on and the sound, and Joe, the engineer, and the bar staff and the security and the receptionist, everything adds up. So you need to cover your costs. So our sliding scale means that if a certain target is hit on the bar, then their rent goes down in increments as the bar goes up. That's the kind of best.
So make
deal
sure
that we
you've got
can
loads of
offer.
alcoholic mates coming along to your
Yeah.
gig. Right, I think we've really overrun here. So what I'd say is, first of all, thanks for coming along. Do stick around afterwards. As you've heard, the likelihood of getting booked or someone to pay attention to you is actually much stronger if they've met you or know who you are. The other thing is that we've got some of the panelists' music selections coming up. Thanks very much for all of you for taking part, and to Mikey, who's been working even harder on this than I have. There he is over there. And for all the team that have made it happen, and also the Electric Circus. So, yes, stick around. We're going to move these seats away, and then we're going to hang out. If you could let these guys just quickly nip back and replenish their drinks, and then after that, foist your music on them and make sure they remember you for the next time. Thanks a lot.